I have two brief questions I'd like to ask, if I may.
Hi, welcome to Left Foot Media. My name is Brendan Malone and you're watching The Daily Question. Today's question of the day: what was the biggest mistake in the history of Star Wars? Now, was it the prequels trilogy? Others might argue that it was Jar Jar Binks. Some people might say it was the awful writing of Luke Skywalker in The Last Jedi. Some people might say it was the Mary Poppins moment in The Last Jedi. Others might say it was Qui-Gon Jinn. The biggest mistake, though, in my book, as far as I'm concerned, in the history of Star Wars, was the hiring of Rian Johnson. Now, please hear me out. I don't mean in the sense that, oh, they should have never hired that guy and he just proved how wrong he was for the job. I mean in the much bigger story writing sense. If you look at the two Star Wars trilogies that we have obviously two existing and complete trilogies and a third one that is not finished yet. But if you look at those two completed trilogies, they have one very important thing, among others, but one very important aspect of the creative side of things that they have in common. And that is the fact that they have a single creative guardian, a gatekeeper, if you like, someone who is holding that story in existence, who is keeping that story, the continuity, and sort of keeping the overarching story that's unfolding over the three different films. They are safeguarding that, if you like. And that person was obviously George Lucas. Now, it didn't have to be George Lucas, but it makes perfect sense that you would have someone in that role. Why? Because with the Star Wars trilogies, what you have is a journey narrative. You have a journey that begins in the first film with a set of characters and then which unfolds over the subsequent films. So it makes perfect sense that because this is going to play out over three different films, in order to keep some basic storytelling continuity here, that you actually have one person or the same people who are creatively keeping all of that held together. Now, that's the exact opposite of what happened with this new trilogy. What they did was, you start with J.J. Abrams and Lawrence Kasdan, and then all of a sudden, on the second film in, they hire not just a new director, but that new director becomes a brand new writer as well. So you've got this completely new and different creative control now happening in the middle of a trilogy, a three-part story that is supposed to be a journey narrative and has already been well and truly established, that journey and those characters, in that first film. Now, you can get away with doing that kind of thing if this was, say, Fast and the Furious. Now, Fast and the Furious is different. It's not about telling a story and having it unfold over multiple different films. In that film, what you do is you take a group of characters and you take them on a wacky, zany action adventure. And their adventure starts at the beginning of one film and it ends at the end of that same film, right? And so what that means is you can then hand off those characters to a new writer and director and you can say, hey, here you go, here's this group of characters, you take them on the zany, wacky action adventure, the heist adventure that you want to take them on. And then someone else, a completely different writer, director again, can say, hey, I'd love to have a shot at taking those characters on my own wacky filmic adventure. And you can do that, right? Because of what the Fast and the Furious is. But Star Wars trilogies are not like that, yet that's exactly what they did when they handed this mythology and these characters to Rian Johnson, and they effectively said, hey, here you go. Despite what we've done already in establishing this new story, remember, that's told over three different parts, you can take these characters and you can take them on whatever wacky adventure you want to take them on. And to me, that was the biggest mistake in the history of Star Wars. So many of the problems in The Last Jedi are a direct result of actually introducing someone completely new into the role of creative controller. This person who is not connected with where the story has actually begun, and there's lots of big and important story points that were begun in the first film, has now been dropped right into that role. That made absolutely no sense. And as I said, you see that problem play out in the storytelling of The Last Jedi. I think what they should have done was they should have said, okay, Lawrence Kasdan, J.J. Abrams, you are in this for 3 films, even if we have to take 10 years instead of just say, I don't know, 5 or 6 to tell this story because you've got other commitments, we need you guys to helm this thing all the way through. Even if, for example, we bring in other directors along the way and we might include other writers to help us out, you guys have got to fill the role that George Lucas previously filled as creative guardian of this new trilogy. Now, even if the results weren't perfect and they didn't live up to all the hype and all of the goodness of the original trilogy, there still would have been that storytelling continuity there, which has now been completely ruptured because of what happened with The Last Jedi. Look, even if you go back and look at the original prequel trilogy that Lucas made, now it's got its problems, right? It is not a great example of filmmaking. But one thing that you can definitely not say is that there was just a failure to keep the sort of journey on a consistent arc there. Now, the way the journey unfolded wasn't so great in that aspect of the storytelling. However, you can definitely see there is a creative continuity there. And those characters, what's happening, even if it's flawed, there is a consistency there where the story begins in one film, carries on in the next, and then comes to a conclusion in the final film. It's not like one film establishes something or a whole lot of things about characters and the story, and then the next film all of a sudden just flies off in a completely different direction as if it's some brand new thing. You can do that with Fast and the Furious movies. You can't do that if you're making this type of trilogy, which is about a journey narrative, and it's a story that's unfolding after already being well established in the first film over 3 different films. And I don't know why no one at Disney actually realized this. To me, this is just such basic common sense stuff, that if you are going to have a story that is told in 3 parts, then you need to actually get the people who are going to be involved in telling that story. Even if you're going to use different people, they need to agree on that story together up front at the beginning. You don't just keep tacking on people to the story like it was one of those, you know, that, I don't know if you've ever used to play that party game where someone writes a sentence and then they fold it over on the piece of paper so it's hidden, and they hand the piece of paper to someone on their right, and then they write a next sentence and they fold it over again. You go all the way around the circle and then you open it up and you see what the story says. That's effectively what they've done with this new trilogy, I think. And it's just sloppy. And there's no strong creative continuity. The journey arc gets messed up. It's just not a good thing. So that's why I think this was the biggest mistake. And it doesn't necessarily have anything to do with Rian Johnson. This could have been someone else that they introduced in here. It could have been a completely different director altogether, writer-director. But to actually just stop your creative continuity dead like that in a trilogy and just drop someone else into it and say, hey, take these characters where you want to me that was a huge mistake. As per usual, I'd love to hear your thoughts, so please let me know what you think in the comments section below. And if you like the content I'm creating and you'd like to see more of it, then please support me on Patreon for as little as $1 a month. There's a link in the description below and a link on screen at the end of this video. That's right, I can hear my theme music too. I'll see you tomorrow on The Daily Question.